One summer afternoon in 2013, DC police detained, questioned, and searched a man who appeared suspicious and potential dangerous. This wasn't what I was wearing the day of detention, to be fair, but I have pictured it as well. I know it's very frightening. Try to remain calm. At this time, I was interning at the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C., and I was visiting a police station for work. I was on my way out, and before I could make it to my car, two police cars pulled up to block my exit. And an officer approached me from behind. He told me to stop, take my backpack off, and put my hands on the police car parked next to us. About a dozen officers then gathered near us. All of them had handguns. Some had assault rifles. The rifles took my backpack. They patted me down, they took a picture of me spread on the police car, and they left. And as all this was happening, as I was on the police car trying to ignore the shaking in my legs, trying to think clearly about what I should do, something stuck out to me as odd. When I look at myself in this photo, if I were to describe myself, I think I said something like 19 years old, Indian man, black shirt, wearing glasses, but they weren't including any of this detail. Into their police radios at this described me. They kept saying, Middle Eastern male with a backpack, Middle Eastern man with a backpack. And this description carried out into their police reports. I never expect to be described by my own government in these terms: lurking, nefarious, terrorist, and detention dragged out like this. Send dogs trained to smell explosives to sweep the area I have been in. They called the federal government to see if I was on any watch list. They sent a couple of detectives to cross-examine me on way. If I claim I had nothing to hide, I would consent to search of my car. And I could see they weren't happy with me. But I felt I had no way of knowing what they want to do next. At one point, the officer who patted me down scanned the side of the police station to see where the security camera was, to see how much of this was being recorded. And when he did, it really saying is how completely I was at their mercy. I think we're all normalized from a young age the idea of police officer and arrest and handcuff. So it's easy to forget how demeaning and coercive a thing it is to seize control over another person's body. I know it sounds like the point of my story is how badly treated I was because of my race. And yes, I don't think I would be detained if I were white. But actually, what I have in my mind today is something else. What I have in mind is how much worse things might been if I weren't a flood. I mean, they took I might been trying to plant an explosive, and they investigate that possibility for an hour and a half. But I was never put in handcuffs. I was never taken to jail. I think if I were from one of Washington D.C. first community of color, and they took I was endangering of Pfizer's life, things might have ended differently. And in fact, in our system, I think it's better to be an unknown person suspected to trying to blow up a police station than it is to be a poor person We suspected of much less than this. I want to give you an example from my current work. Right now, I'm working at a civil rights organization in DC called Equal Justice Under Law. Let me start by asking you all a question. How many of you have ever gotten a parking ticket in your life? Raise your hand. Yeah, so have. And when I had to pay it, I felt annoying and I felt bad. But I paid it and I move on. I'm guessing most of you have paid your ticket as well. But what would you have if you couldn't afford the amount on the ticket and your family doesn't have the money either? What happens then? Well, one thing that's not supposed to happen under the law is you are not supposed to be arrested and jailed simply because you cannot afford to pay. That's illegal under federal law. But that's what local government across the country are doing to people who are poor. And so many of our lawsuits at Equal Justice Under Law target these modern day debtors' prisons. One of our cases is against Ferguson, Missouri. And I know when I say Ferguson, many of you will think of police violation. But today, I want to talk about a different aspect of the relationship between their police force and their citizens. Ferguson was issuing an average of over 2 arrest warrants per patient per year, mostly for unpaid debt to the courts. When I imagine what that would feel like if every time I left my house, there was a chance a police officer would run my license plate, see a warrant for unpaid debt, seize my body the way they did in DC, and they take me to a jail cell. I feel a little sick. I have met many of the people in Ferguson who have experienced this, and I have heard some of their stories. In Ferguson jail, in each small cell, there is a bunk bed and a toilet, but they pack up 4 people into each cell. So there be 2 people of the bunk and 2 people of the floor. One with no hair to get expect right next to the first toilet, which was never clean. In fact, the whole cell was never clean, so the floor and the walls were lined with blood and mucus. No water to drink except coming out of a spigot connected to the toilet. The water tasted dirty. There was never enough food, never any showers. Women menstruating without any hygienic product. No medical attention. When asked a woman about medical attention, she laughed and she said, "Oh, no. The only attention you get from the guards is sexual." So they take debtors to this place and they said, "We're not letting you leave until you make a payment on your debt. And if you could call a family member who could somehow come up with some money, then maybe you were out. If it was enough money, you were out. But if it was not, you stay here for days or weeks, and every day the guards will come down to the cell and haggle with the debtor about the price of real estate day. You have stayed until at some point the jail would be booked to capacity." and they want to book someone new in. And at the point, they think, okay, it's unlikely this person can come up with the money. It's more likely this new person will. You went out, they're in, and the machine kept moving like that. I met a man who 9 years ago was arrested for panhandling in a Walgreens. He couldn't afford his fines and his court fees from that case. When he was young, he survived a house fire only because he jumped out of the third-story window to escape. But the fall left him with damage to his brain and several parts of his body, including his leg, so he cannot work, and he relies on social security payments to survive. When I met him in his apartment, he had nothing of value there, not even food in his fridge. He is chronically hungry. He had nothing of value in his apartment except a small piece of cardboard on which he had written the name of his children. He carried this a lot. He was happy to show it to me, but he cannot pay his fines and fees because he has nothing to give. In the last 9 years, he has been arrested 13 times and jailed for a total of 1,030 days. On that panhandling case, one of the stretches lasted 45 days. Just imagine spending from right now until sometime in June in the place that I described to you a few moments ago. He told me about all this sweet attempt he is in Ferguson's jail. About the time a man found a way to hang himself out of the reach of the other inmates. So all they could do was yell and yell and yell, trying to get the guards' attention so they could come down and cut him down. And he told me that I took the guards over 5 minutes to respond, and when they come, the man was unconscious. So they called the paramedics, and the paramedics went to the cell. They said he will be okay. So they just left him there on the floor. I heard many stories like this, and they shouldn't have surprised me because suicide is the single leading cause of death in our local jails. This is related to the lack of mental health care in our jails. What I have in mind is our policy of bail. In our system, whether you are detained or free, pending trial is not a matter of how dangerous you are and how much of a risk you pose. It's a matter of whether you can afford to post your bail amount. So Bill Cosby, whose bail was set at $1 million, immediately writes the check and doesn't spend a second in a jail cell. But Sandra Bland, who died in jail, would die in jail, was only there because her family was unable to come up with $5,000. In fact, there are 500,000 Sandra Blands across the country. We are told that our jails are places for criminals, but statistically that's not the case. 3 out of every 5 people in jail right now are their pre-trial. They haven't been convicted of any crime. They have not plead guilty to any offense. Right here in San Francisco, 85% of the inmates in our jail in San Francisco are pre-trial detainees. This means San Francisco is spending something like $80 million every year to fund pre-trial detention. Many of these people who are in jail only because they cannot post bail are facing allegations so minor that the amount of the time it will take for them to sit waiting for trial is longer than the sentence they would receive if convicted, which means they are guaranteed to get out faster if they just plead guilty. So now the choice is, should I stay here in this horrible place, away from my family and my defendants, almost guaranteed to lose my job, and they fake the charge? Or should I just plead guilty to whatever the prosecutor wants and get out? And at this point, they are pre-trial detainees, not criminal. But once they take that plea deal, we will call them criminals. Have been in this situation because an adult person would have simply been bailed up. At this point, you might be wondering, this guy's in the inspiration section, what is he doing? This is extremely depressing. I want my money back. But in actually, I've been talking about jailing much less depression than the alternative. Because I think if we don't talk about these issues and collectively change how we think about jailing and the end of all of our lives, we will still have jail full of poor people who don't belong there. That really is depressing to me. But what's exciting to me is the thought that this story can move us to think about jailing in different terms, not in sterile police terms like mass incarceration or sanctioning of non-violent offenders, but in human terms. When we put a human being in cage for days or weeks or months or even years, what are we doing to that person's mind and body? Under what condition are we really willing to do that? And so if starting a few hundred of us in this room, we can commit to thinking about jailing in this different light, then we can undo that normalization I was referring to earlier. If I leave you with anything today, I have it with the thought that if we want anything to fundamentally change, not just to reform our police on bail and fines and fees, but also to make sure that whatever new police replace those don't punish the poor and the marginalized in their own new way. If we want that kind of change, then this shift in thinking is required of each of us. Thank you.